So today I would like to talk to you about purity culture and my experiences with purity culture growing up in the early 2000s as an atheist. Purity culture wasn't so much forced upon me from ministers or from other adults, but more from my peers. You know, if she has sex before she's married, she's a total slut. She's all used up. Guys saying, oh, I would never have sex with her. Look how many guys she slept with. Girls calling each other sluts and all sorts of other nasty things that really can bring down a person's self-esteem. On top of that, there was a really high population of Muslims in my high school. And if you think Christians have a thing for purity and for sex, Muslims take it to another level. Like, I must cover myself up. No man can see me unless he is my husband or family. By covering myself up, I am telling men that I am the real prize, that I am something to be desired. If you show even a sliver of skin, you are luring men away. You will go to hell. Like, if he has sex with you, you're just some kind of plaything. And to be honest, it felt like it must be really bad and really hard for the guys. Because they're told that if a woman shows off her body, shows off her hair, decides to have sex out of wedlock, that she's suddenly crap and undesirable. Newsflash, men are not sex-crazed monkeys, and women have libidos too. We need to be taught to respect each other's boundaries, but also how to set our own. I also heard things like, oh my god, if my parents ever found out that I had a boyfriend, they would disown me and send me to India. If I ever had sex with a guy, my parents would friggin' kill me. And so naturally I absorbed all of these messages around me, and like the impressionable teenager I was, I followed suit. I didn't necessarily care for the concept of waiting for marriage, nor did I believe in a god. I just wanted to appear desirable and as a good person. So I decided to swear off sex until I got married. I remember being confronted by a couple of Muslim girls in gym class asking the kinds of questions that 15-year-old girls do. Like, so Emily, are you a Christian? Do you believe in God being white and all? And I thought, no, I don't. I'm an atheist. I told them straight up. And they got all up in my grill saying things like, you're going to hell. You're a terrible person. Why don't you do awful things? Why aren't you just having sex with every guy in school? And I thought about it for a moment. It's like, why aren't I having sex with every guy in school? And the answer came to me because no one's really ever shown interest in me. I was taught that the guy is the one who's supposed to show interest. It's the guy that's supposed to make the effort and ask someone out. You don't make the effort. If you make the effort, you're desperate. But the real answer as to why I hadn't been having sex is because I didn't really have a lot of friends, and the idea of dating, although there, wasn't really in the front of my mind. And because no one asked me out, the concept of sex hadn't really crossed my mind as something I wanted. I didn't really even understand dating culture. Like, what? Is the guy I'm crushing on or swooning over supposed to be someone I'm actually supposed to marry? Like, it didn't make any sense. So I figured, well, I'm not having sex. I don't really have a desire to have sex. So I guess I'm just waiting until marriage. I guess it's kind of easy to say I'm going to wait until marriage when you don't have a properly developed sex drive yet, which is probably why religious leaders try to force it on people very young, before they can even have a proper concept of what sex is. And so at 15, I believed that sex was gross and icky, and that if you had sex outside of marriage, you were gross and icky and no one would want you. And that kind of culture just turned me off sex. Like, why would anybody want to have sex if this is the kind of information that's being pumped into your brain? But at the same time, in and around my school, girls that did have sex seemed to have an air of confidence surrounding them, and boys were lauded over for having sex with lots of different girls, like they were studs. This double standard didn't make a lot of sense. On top of that, I didn't have a very good sex education. Granted, it was very good for its time, and I have to remind myself that it is still probably very good for most parts of North America, especially in the United States. I was taught the basic mechanics of sex. Penis and vagina equals baby is how you put on a condom. This is what an STD looks like. This is an egg. This is a sperm. I was taught that sex was a completely biological function. Sex makes babies. Nothing about homosexuality or libidos or consent or intimacy or how sex is pleasurable or an expression of love. Heterosexual sex equals babies, and that's the only reason people have sex. And I kind of just thought, yeah, great, sure, sex makes babies. That's how babies are born. So if I don't want to have kids, I don't have sex. But at the same time, I was absorbing a lot of the media around me, such as teen movies and TV shows, and still, talking to people. And so, like, in a lot of shows, people would just start kissing and clothes would fall off, and then they would have sex. And I thought, that's just how things happen. No concept of enthusiastic consent, just, well, we're already naked, let's go. So my parents weren't much help either. Since I thought I learned everything I needed to know about sex from my peers and from my school, I didn't really ask a lot of questions from my parents. They weren't really the kind of open parents that you really felt like you could ask questions from anyway. My dad never said the word sex to me in the context of intercourse until I was 24. That is how bad my parents were. This, coupled with the fact that my parents were constantly at each other's throats and never really showed any amount of intimacy towards each other. I couldn't imagine my parents actually ceasing fire long enough to show each other intimacy or to, get to business. I kind of just thought they turned themselves off when they went to sleep. Sex just makes babies, so why would you wear a condom? If you don't want kids, don't have sex. I didn't know anything about orgasms until I was out of high school, and again I had to learn it from the media and my peers, rather than from someone I loved and trusted. So purity was just something you did to prevent the question from coming up. And that's just how things were, until I met this person. This family had moved into the house 2 doors down from me, and they had a son who was about 1.5 years older than me, or 2 grade levels, because I'm born January and he was born in October. He was smart and charming and funny, and he had a lot of confidence in himself. So naturally we started spending more time together and we became friends. He told me that he had had sex with a lot of girls and that he had lots of friends with benefits. He also came from a Pakistani Muslim family and maintained that the person he married would be someone that his parents chose for him and would be someone from his culture and would be someone who hadn't had sex outside of marriage. I thought he was a total hypocrite. How can you hold these kinds of standards for a person when you can't even hold these standards for yourself? But the more I hung out with him, the more I fell for him. being someone who didn't have a lot of friends and didn't have a lot of experience, I craved intimacy and affection. So when we would start fondling and kissing, I naturally wanted more, but I thought if I stopped at sex, then I'm still good. You're just being a tease, right? And me not having the language to tell him that this is how I felt meant that I just felt like a really bad person and that I was just being mean to him. And so one night, it just kind of happened. I kind of just was like, well, here we are. We're already in bed. I guess I might as well just do it. Because I don't want you to be mad at me anymore. I'm not going to say I was raped, but it was definitely not enthusiastic consent. It's just what kind of happens with teenagers, right? And after that, I kind of recoiled from myself because I didn't want to have bad experiences, so I thought if I have no experiences, I can't have a bad experience. I stayed away from parties in college and I buried myself in books. But at the same time, I wanted to have friends. I wanted to experience intimacy. I wanted relationships. I wanted to feel valued. And so I kind of just decided one day to choose a person that would fulfill my needs. And I found someone who kind of leaned off my every word because he was kind of the nerdy type who didn't have a lot of experiences himself. I guess we both kind of thought that this is all I'm good for. So we kind of just used each other as intimacy dummies and shoulders to rest our heads on for about 3 years. And once I graduated, I moved back home, and so did he, and so we kind of naturally just drifted apart. And it didn't make sense to keep things going, so we kind of just ended it, and I don't really talk to him anymore. Purity culture and the general taboo nature around sex damages young minds. It prevents us from exploring who we are sexually and emotionally. It teaches us that heterosexuality, marriage, and children are the gold standards that we have to live up to. And if we don't live up to these standards, we are incomplete as people. I wanted to find out what made me complete my own way. I wanted to explore sex and figure out what I enjoyed and who I enjoyed it with before settling down, and I didn't want my worth to be defined by other people's perceptions of me. Purity culture gives us a script to follow, but we should be allowed to write our own scripts. I used to think that waiting for marriage was virtuous, but I don't want to put that much weight on sex. Sex should be freeing, a form of expression for everyone. Purity culture taught me that I was dirty and that I couldn't talk about sex with anybody. It taught me that I just had to submit myself to men. We need to value all parties in a relationship as equals. We need to be open about sex and what it means to people. If you are going to have sex, we need to give young people the tools to make well-informed decisions, and we need to take sin out of the equation. Purity culture hurt my generation, and it's still being perpetuated in 2019. Teach kids about sex. Have open and frank conversations and tell them to let you know when they're uncomfortable. Teach kids about consent, not just, hey, do you want to have sex, but understanding what their body wants and that their body belongs to them and that only they get to decide what is okay. Teach people about different kinds of sex and different kinds of expressions of intimacy and different kinds of relationships. And teach them that all sexualities are valid, and that all relationships are valid, provided that they are between consenting and knowledgeable parties. A person's value is not set by how much sex they have or do not have, or what kind of sex they have. By breaking down barriers, we can end purity culture so that people can be more open and no one has to feel gross or icky or like they are going to hell for having sexual desires. And with more open conversations, perhaps people won't feel like they need to force others into an ideology. Purity culture is no way to grow up, and it has to stop.